Yes guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another interesting video. If you're seeing me for the first time, hi, my name's Renault. You're most welcome to my channel. To my returning viewers and subscribers, I thank you very much. I love you. So in this particular video, I want to discuss and speak about the US's sphere of influence, the US's imperialism in the Western Hemisphere. So we've all seen, unless you're living under a rock, unless you haven't been watching the news, catching up with the news, keeping up with the news, we've all seen how the US did an intervention in Venezuela, right? Where they swooped in and took out the Venezuelan president Maduro and his wife and took them to the United States to face the US justice system. According to international law, this is completely prohibited. It's illegal. You're not supposed to go into foreign countries and just, overthrow their government and take their leaders and take them to the US to face the US justice system. Like the US justice system is the justice system for the entire world. You know what I mean? I think it's very, very problematic, but it's nothing new. The US is a superpower, and superpowers always trying to flex their muscle and assert dominance and, trying to subdue countries that are smaller than them, right? That are weak and supposedly weaker than them. So this is nothing new. There was a doctrine called Monroe Doctrine, which basically speaks about the US having the entire Western Hemisphere, basically, and the entire Western Hemisphere being in the US's sphere of influence, right? So I guess, Asia and maybe Africa are China's sphere of influence, and maybe, Russia and, the Eastern Europe is Russia's sphere of influence, and then you have Europe and whatnot. Now, I think this whole idea of, like, obviously we saw, last year where the US was bombing, boats in the Caribbean Sea. They say they were smuggling drugs, supposed to be the war on drugs, but they didn't provide any evidence for that, right? So it's extrajudicial killings, right, basically. But again, the US can get away with it because they're a superpower. And who's going to stand up to the US? Absolutely no one. Russia's not, well, Russia, sort of would, but like Europe is not going to stand up to any other Western country is not going to stand up to the US, really and truly. You know what I mean? The US can pretty much do what it wants and get away with it, right? Which is unfair in in the world, in a global system. It's unfair, but this is what happens when you have power, and when you have unchecked power, and when you can do things and not be held accountable. You can basically do whatever you want, get away with murder. It's unfortunate, but that's how the situation is. That's how the world is, right? So they started off with bombing small vessels in the Caribbean Sea, claiming it was to do with the war on drugs. Then they progressed from that to actually going into Venezuela and swooping in, taking the Venezuelan president Maduro and his wife to the United States to face the US justice system, right? Now, this is, they always frame and always have framed the Caribbean, countries that line the Caribbean Sea as America's backyard. They've always done that, right? The US has a history, of asserting its dominance and, on countries from Latin America, Central America, Caribbean, and even Canada, to be honest, as well. Again, because of the Monroe Doctrine. Now, it's very problematic. The US, they invaded Grenada, they've invaded Cuba, maybe not invaded Cuba, but I'll put a list. But they've done a lot of things in the Caribbean. I know they invaded Grenada, and they've done things in Cuba, in Panama, in Haiti, Guatemala, and obviously Venezuela. They've done things in a lot of Caribbean Sea countries, right? And I think it's very problematic, this whole idea of, Caribbean countries or countries that line the Caribbean Sea being in America's backyard. I think it's very problematic when we say, well, when they say that, the entire Western Hemisphere, made up of dozens of countries, is under America's, or is in America's sphere of influence. It's very problematic because it means that, what does it mean for independent countries to be in that sphere of influence? What does it mean? It means that they can't align with who they want to align with, right? So if a small country like Grenada, for example, wants to align with China, they can't because they're in America's backyard, which is unfair because if they're supposed to be a sovereign country, if they're supposed to be a free country, if they're supposed to be an independent nation, they should be able to align with whomever they want to. Whosoever they want to align with, they should be able to do so, regardless of how the United States feels about it. It's nice when you can be on good terms with your neighbors, which they're not really neighbors like that. You know what I mean? Because countries even on the other side of the Caribbean Sea are supposedly in America's backyard. So, and you're talking like, I'm sure, like thousands of miles away across oceans, yet you're in America's backyard. So it raises questions about countries' real sovereignty. Like, are they really sovereign? Are they really independent if they can't make choices about who they want to align with? Because it will upset America, because it really raises questions about countries' independence, right? And then also, with it being a superpower and trying to flex its muscles and assert dominance on and trying to subdue other smaller, weaker countries, it says to me that the United States isn't playing fair. They're almost trying to bully in the region and in that part of the world. We all know them going into Venezuela. It's nothing to do with the Venezuelan people, rather. It's to do with money and oil. That's all it's to do with. That's all they care about, is just getting the oil. Because Venezuela has some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, right? So, and bigger than Saudi Arabia, I'm hearing. So if you can imagine an oil-rich country, you think of like Saudi Arabia. They have even more oil than Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of, there's a lot at stake here, right? There's a lot of reasons to go into Venezuela and trying to subdue them and dominate them, because there's a lot at stake. I think that, so they don't care about the Venezuelan people. All they want is the oil. I think it's good that you have countries like Russia. I think it's good. That's why, remember, you had the Cold War. Obviously, I wasn't alive then, but obviously I've done research on it, and my parents, my dad has told me about the Cold War and whatnot, right? So I think it's good that you have countries like Russia and superpowers coming up like China that will make a balance in the world. Because right now, or previous to now, the US was up here. No one could say nothing to the US. The US dominates the world. The US is running the world. The US is running things. And I don't think that that's right. Because again, when you have unchecked power and you can do whatever you want, no one, like, let's be real. If the United States wanted to do whatever they wanted to do, they could and get away with it because no one would challenge them. There's been talk about the US wanting Greenland. If the US really wanted to, they could annex Greenland today or tomorrow, and who would really stop them? They may get condemnation from Europe. They may get condemnation from other countries around the world. But who would really stop the United States from annexing Greenland? No one. I don't believe anyone will. They're the greatest superpower. They got the best military and whatnot. So who's really going to stop them? You know what I mean? It may ruffle some feathers, but who would really stop them? And, like, you have the International Criminal Court and stuff like that. They, for the longest time, have been putting African leaders on trial. If the United States president did something seriously wrong, right? Who is the United States president answerable to? Who's going to hold the United States president accountable? The American people are not really going to do that. They're not. You know what I mean? They may protest and march, and you know what I mean? If they're really serious, then maybe they could hold the United States president accountable. And maybe, the EU could, if they're really serious. But to be honest, I don't think anyone can hold the United States president accountable, because he's supposedly the richest, not the richest, but the most influential, powerful person on the planet. So who's really going to hold him accountable? So this is what I mean. When, you have unchecked power, and you're the most powerful, and you're the power that be, who's really going to stop you? Who's really going to hold you accountable? Who's really gonna put you in check? You know, who's really going to contain you? The only way people will do that is if they're really serious. But as I was saying, I think it's good you have countries like Russia, you have countries like China that are coming up to create a balance in the world. They even had the BRICS summit last year. You know, BRICS nations. You know, South Africa, India, China, Russia, like they're all getting together, countries in the global south, to create their own thing, you know, which is independent of the EU and United States, the West, and you know what I mean? I think these things are good to create a balance in the world. Because right now, as I said, before now, the scale has been tipped towards the United States. And so now I think with other countries coming up is creating more of a balance to the world order, which I think is really good and is highly needed. Because again, when one country has too much power in the world, they can just do whatever they want, do as they please and get away with it. This whole idea of, as I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of spheres of influence um, is something that's not just limited to the United States. As I said, with Russia, you have, you know, Eastern Europe. And that's why I think there's a lot of problem going on today with Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe, because that's their sphere of influence. The former Soviet Union countries, that's Russia's sphere of influence. China, you know, with Taiwan and Hong Kong and, you know, even Southeast Asia and stuff like that, that's China's sphere of influence. You know what I mean? So they're all doing the same thing. As much as they will tell you, you know, don't, you know, they will condemn Russia and they'll say Russia is bad and Russia's this and Russia's that and we should stand against Russia, you know. And I'm not saying the Russia-Ukraine war is good. I'm not taking sides with anyone, but I'm just saying, I'm just highlighting the hypocrisy, because they will blame Russia and say what Russia's doing and stuff like that is wrong. But Russia is pretty much doing the same thing as the United States, you know, where they're going into countries illegally and doing whatever they're doing. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing the US is doing. So there's no one is more moral than another, right? No one is. China's not more moral than the US. US is not more moral than China. China's not more Russia's not more moral than the US. US isn't more more moral than Russia, right? There's no, like, everyone's on the same playing field. Everyone's in the same boat. Everyone is exercising their power and doing whatever they want to do, right? And so I think it's hypocritical the way they, you know, try and get you to hate the Russia and China, or make them out as that's the US's enemy, you know, when, to be honest with you, the US government is doing the exact same thing and has done worse in the past, you know. So yeah, I think US imperialism rears its ugly head again, obviously with the events with what we've seen in Venezuela recently. So I don't know how this is all gonna play out, how this is all gonna pan out. We're yet to see. We just play it by ear. We'll just have to see what happens, you know. We just have to watch this space, or watch that space, watch their space, you know what I mean? But yeah, we just have to see how this all plays out, how this all plans out. But yeah, I think the day when that whole idea of US sphere of influence ends would be really good. And I think then countries in the Western Hemisphere will probably truly be free, you know, or maybe they will be a bit more freer, I think, to make decisions for themselves, to align with whomever they want to align with. Because, you know, in the case of Grenada, for example, the reason why they went in, because Grenada, the government at the time, was aligning itself with the US's enemy at the time, Russia and Cuba. So that's why they went in to try and, you know, topple that government, you know, either covertly or overtly, directly or indirectly, because that's what they do. Sometimes they don't do it directly, like what they did in Venezuela. They do it covertly. They'll, you know, create a coup in the country and topple the leader, topple the government, and install someone who's more favorable to them. You know, they're very slick, they're very cunning, you know, but people can see what's going on, you know. So I don't think America is to be trusted. I don't think that America's this you know, savior of the world and has come in peace and has come to save these countries from bad governance or whatever. I mean, there may be a small part of it they may genuinely are trying to, maybe genuinely are trying to, you know, bring about positive change. But I would say 98% or 99% of the time, they have their own secret agenda of whatever they want to do, and they don't care about the people of that country. They just want to do whatever they want to do, take whatever they want to take. They have their own reasoning, they have their own agenda, they have their own strategy, you know, and their own reasons as to why they're doing what they're doing. You know what I mean? So I don't think that they are to be trusted. But unfortunately, as a smaller country or smaller nation, you have to just try to, you know, work with the bigger power, you know, because you don't really have a choice. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's basically all about today's video. Please let me know what you think. Drop a comment. I do reply back. You know what I mean? Please share the video. Please like the video if you enjoyed the video. It encourages me, helps grow the channel. You know, I really do appreciate if you would, you know, drop a comment, like it, and you know what I mean, show some interest. So yeah, until next time, bye for now.